It was supposed to be just another evening in the elite world of Silicon Valley, another lavish party, filled with the usual suspects, tech moguls, venture capitalists, and the brightest minds of the future. The air buzzed with the latest innovations, business deals, and casual gossip about the future of AI, space travel, and electric cars. But that evening, something completely unexpected was about to unfold, a moment no one could have predicted. A challenge. A moment that would have the world's most famous tech genius do something he had never done before. Elon Musk, the mastermind behind SpaceX, Tesla, and numerous other groundbreaking companies, had just entered the venue. As usual, his presence commanded attention. His quiet confidence, enigmatic smile, and that aura of someone who could change the world with a single tweet made him an instant focal point wherever he went. However, tonight was different. Elon had been invited, like so many others, to unwind. He was here for a bit of fun, a change from his intense work life. No speeches. No business deals. Just an opportunity to relax among friends and peers. But as soon as he stepped into the room, the energy shifted. A hush fell over the crowd. The chatter died down, and all eyes turned toward him. He wasn't just another billionaire at a social gathering tonight, he was the Elon Musk, and when you're Elon Musk, you don't just get invited to parties. You become the event. "Hey, Elon," someone called from the crowd, breaking the silence. It was one of his old friends from PayPal, a playful grin on his face. "We've got a little game going on tonight. A challenge, actually. And guess what? You're the star of it." Elon raised an eyebrow, already feeling the weight of the room's expectations pressing down on him. "A challenge," he muttered, his mind already racing, trying to figure out what it could be. Some kind of tech trivia. A SpaceX-related puzzle. Surely not something that could actually embarrass him. But then the organizer, a well-known Silicon Valley personality with a reputation for pushing boundaries, stepped forward with a devilish smile. "Here's the deal, Elon. Everyone's going to take part in the karaoke showdown. And guess who's up first?" Elon blinked. Karaoke? He wasn't the singing type, and the idea of singing in front of a crowd, especially one that included some of the brightest minds in the world, was absurd. But the pressure was mounting. The crowd was already cheering, urging him on. Some were laughing, others had their phones out, clearly ready to film. A brief moment of silence hung in the air, as if everyone was waiting for him to react. But then, like a man caught in a current, he took a deep breath. There was no backing out now. It wasn't that he was shy, far from it. But this? This was different. He wasn't known for performing in front of audiences. Sure, he was a master at launching rockets into space, but singing? That was uncharted territory. The room's energy shifted again. A few people exchanged knowing glances. This was going to be something else. And then, the moment everyone was waiting for came. Elon stepped onto the stage. As soon as he did, the music began to play. A classic rock anthem, one everyone knew. He was handed a microphone, and for a moment, he just stood there, staring at the crowd. His mind raced. What was he supposed to do next? How could he pull this off? He was no rock star. He was a man who made electric cars and sent people to Mars. As the opening guitar riff echoed through the speakers, Elon did something no one expected. With a shaky hand, he brought the microphone to his lips and began to sing. But it wasn't just singing. He wasn't reading the lyrics from the screen. Instead, he closed his eyes for a second and let the music take him over. For a split second, Elon Musk wasn't the tech mogul. He wasn't the visionary. He was just a man, standing on a stage, taking on the most unlikely challenge of his life. And the crowd? They were completely silent. Every eye was locked on him. No one had expected this, least of all Elon. His voice cracked at first, and there were a few off-key notes. But there was something raw, something real about it. The more he sang, the more the crowd seemed to lean in, almost as if they were discovering a new side of the man they all thought they knew. But what happened next was beyond anyone's imagination. As the song progressed, something incredible started to happen. Elon wasn't just singing anymore. He was performing. There was a vulnerability in his voice, an honesty that no one had ever seen in him before. The entire room felt the shift. This wasn't just a man singing for fun. This was Elon Musk, stepping outside the comfortable confines of his business empire and doing something entirely new. At that moment, it became clear. The world wasn't watching a billionaire sing, they were watching a man finally let go of the facade he had built around himself for years. And in doing so, he connected with his audience in a way that was impossible to ignore. But how did this moment come to be? What would cause Elon Musk, someone known for launching rockets and shaping the future of humanity's exploration of space, to step into the world of karaoke, a world so far removed from his usual pursuits? How did he, a man whose mind was often focused on the grandest of ideas, end up here, in front of a crowd, with his heart in his throat and a microphone in his hand? The answer wasn't just about karaoke. It wasn't about the song or the challenge itself. It was about something far more profound. It was about the vulnerability that all great visionaries eventually face, the moment when you have to step out of your comfort zone, embrace uncertainty, and do something that could make or break you in front of the world. And what happened next? Well, that's where the real story begins. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Elon Musk wasn't always the larger-than-life figure we know today. In fact, his journey to becoming one of the world's most influential and, at times, controversial figures was anything but glamorous in its early stages. Born in Pretoria, South Africa, in 1971, Elon showed signs of brilliance from a young age. He wasn't the kind of child to spend his days outdoors playing with other kids. Instead, he was engrossed in books, building computers, and reading science fiction. His mind always seemed to be a few steps ahead of everyone else, constantly imagining a future that others couldn't quite grasp. As a young boy, Elon was intensely shy, introverted even. He would spend hours alone in his room, dismantling gadgets and building new ones. His parents, May and Errol Musk, were proud of his intellectual curiosity, but they didn't always understand the depths of his passion. His father, a successful engineer, was often distant, while his mother, a model and dietitian, was more supportive but still struggled to understand the direction in which Elon's interests were headed. The family dynamic wasn't easy for Elon, and the pressures of being constantly misunderstood weighed heavily on him. By the time Elon was in his late teens, he had already decided that his future lay in the United States. He left South Africa at the age of 17, moving to Canada to attend Queen's University. It was a pivotal moment for him, one that marked the beginning of his quest to change the world, but also one that came with its own set of challenges. His decision to leave South Africa wasn't just about wanting a better education or better opportunities. It was about wanting to escape a world that didn't seem to make sense to him. He wanted to forge his own path, outside of the expectations others had for him. When Elon moved to the US to attend the University of Pennsylvania, he began to truly shine. He dove headfirst into his studies, taking on degrees in both economics and physics. But while others were focused on textbooks and lectures, Elon's mind was already racing ahead to something bigger, something that would eventually lead to the founding of Zip2, a software company that would change the way businesses advertised online. But before that, he had to confront a new world, the world of Silicon Valley. By the time he was in his mid-20s, Elon was a well-known figure in tech circles, though still far from the icon he would become. He had sold Zip2 for nearly $300 million, which gave him a comfortable cushion to launch his next venture, X.com, which would later become PayPal. The pressure of succeeding was immense, and the competition in the valley was fierce, but Elon thrived in that environment. He was never one to back down from a challenge, and in the cutthroat world of tech startups, he would quickly learn that surviving meant constantly adapting and taking risks. Despite his growing success, however, Elon's personal life remained far more complicated. In the early 2000s, Elon was married to his first wife, Justine Musk, and their relationship was often strained by the pressures of his business pursuits. Elon's mind was consumed by his work, his drive to succeed was unmatched, but it came at a cost. His marriage faltered under the weight of his obsessive work habits, and after the couple's first child tragically passed away at 10 weeks old, their relationship struggled to heal. Ultimately, they divorced, though they remained close friends. In the years that followed, Elon's personal relationships would continue to be tested, particularly as he navigated multiple marriages and relationships with high-profile figures. But through it all, Elon's focus never wavered. He had a singular vision: to revolutionize transportation, to make humanity a multiplanetary species, and to create a future powered by sustainable energy. His companies, PayPal, Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink, and the Boring Company, were each born from his unyielding drive to push the boundaries of what was possible. Yet even as his financial success grew, so did the personal cost. Elon was often portrayed in the media as eccentric, unpredictable, and sometimes downright abrasive. He wasn't the typical corporate CEO. He was a man whose vision and ambition often clashed with the traditional expectations of a business leader. At times, Elon's unpredictability seemed like a gift, propelling him forward through obstacles that would have stopped most others in their tracks. Yet, at other times, it felt like a curse. In his quest to change the world, he frequently alienated colleagues, friends, and even investors. He was a man constantly walking a fine line between genius and madness, between inspiration and alienation. Even as his companies achieved monumental success, Elon often found himself standing alone. His vision for a future of electric cars, sustainable energy, and colonizing Mars was frequently met with skepticism, both from the media and from industry insiders who considered his goals unrealistic. Yet he persisted, confident that the world would eventually catch up with him. And in many ways, the world did. Tesla became a leader in electric vehicles, SpaceX achieved feats that were once thought impossible, and Elon Musk became a symbol of innovation and progress. But despite all his achievements, there remained a gap, a loneliness that came with being a visionary in a world that didn't always understand him. Elon Musk was a man who had achieved more than most could ever dream of, but he had done it at the cost of personal relationships, mental peace, and sometimes, even his own happiness. So, when he found himself on the stage that night, facing the karaoke challenge, he wasn't just another billionaire in the spotlight. He was a man who had spent decades building the future, but who had never truly learned how to let go. He had never truly learned how to let his guard down, to embrace the vulnerability of simply being human. The idea of performing in front of others, of doing something as frivolous as singing a song, was a stark contrast to the persona he had spent his life cultivating. It was a challenge that seemed, in some ways, ridiculous. Yet, in another, it was exactly what he needed. For once, Elon wasn't thinking about rockets or electric cars or the future of humanity. He was simply standing there, microphone in hand, looking out at a room full of people who saw him not as a tech mogul, but as just another person who was about to do something that might make him look foolish. It was a moment of pure vulnerability, and in that vulnerability, Elon Musk was about to reveal something the world hadn't seen before. Elon stood there, the microphone gripped tightly in his hand, staring out at the sea of faces. The music played on, but his mind was somewhere else entirely. He was suddenly struck by a realization: this was far bigger than just a karaoke challenge. The pressure of the moment, the expectations, the cameras, the people waiting for him to perform, was intense. For someone who had literally sent rockets to space, this small stage, in a crowded room filled with Silicon Valley's finest, seemed like the most daunting place he'd ever been. The laughter from the crowd had subsided into a kind of quiet anticipation, as though they too could sense the tension building. Everyone was waiting for him to take the plunge, waiting for him to either fail spectacularly or pull off a performance that would elevate him to new heights of popularity. The stakes were high, but not in the way one might imagine. Elon had built his career by taking risks, by being the first to bet on electric cars when others scoffed, by sending rockets to Mars when the world thought it was impossible. But this was different. He wasn't facing a test of intellect or technical know-how. He was facing a test of self. Could he truly let go of the persona he had spent years building, the guarded, calculated figure everyone expected him to be, and embrace the chaos of the moment? His breath quickened as the lyrics flashed on the screen before him. He'd known the song, "Sweet Child O' Mine," by Guns N' Roses, well enough to recognize it, but it suddenly felt like an insurmountable task. The familiar melody that had once been the soundtrack to countless road trips now felt like a mountain that he couldn't climb. He glanced around the room. The faces of the crowd had started to blend together, their eyes eager, almost expectant. His friends, colleagues, and even complete strangers were all looking at him in the same way. Some faces were grinning with excitement, while others seemed bemused by the situation, unsure of what to expect. The weight of their attention pressed in on him like a physical force. Could he pull this off? Or would this be the moment where he revealed, with all the clarity in the world, that the man who had revolutionized industries could not conquer something as simple as singing in public? It wasn't just the pressure from the crowd that weighed on him. It was the internal conflict. An overwhelming realization that despite all his success, despite all his achievements, there was still a part of him that felt unsure. Maybe it was the years of working relentlessly toward lofty goals, Mars, artificial intelligence, sustainable energy, that had left him without the chance to simply be human. Maybe it was the cost of success, the personal relationships that had fallen apart, the emotional toll of pushing the boundaries of possibility while neglecting the simpler joys of life. This challenge, this unexpected karaoke showdown, felt like the first real opportunity to be vulnerable, to step out from behind the mask and just be. But the more Elon thought about it, the more he realized something else. This was his chance to change something fundamental. What if, just for once, he could show the world that the image of Elon Musk, the genius billionaire entrepreneur, wasn't the only version of him? What if he could let down his guard and show the side of himself that was just like everyone else, the person who got nervous, who wasn't always perfect, who was allowed to stumble and fall? As the second verse began, Elon took a deep breath and stepped forward, holding the microphone closer to his lips. The music filled the room, and, for a moment, he was lost in it. He tried to ignore the audience, focusing only on the words. But even as he sang, something seemed to shift within him. His voice cracked at first, and there were moments when he struggled to find the right pitch, but each note felt like a small victory. The crowd, sensing his vulnerability, leaned in a little closer, eager to see what he would do next. It was then that the first murmur began to ripple through the crowd. A few whispers. A few chuckles. And then the rest of the crowd joined in. At first, it wasn't the supportive applause Elon might have hoped for. It was more like an awkward laugh, a mixture of surprise and disbelief. After all, this wasn't the polished, smooth-talking billionaire they were used to seeing. This was a man who was failing, publicly, at something as simple as singing a song. The laughter wasn't mean-spirited, but it stung nonetheless. Elon felt the heat rise in his chest as his mind swirled with a mixture of frustration and self-doubt. What was happening? He was supposed to be the guy who took on the impossible and won. He was the one who made headlines for his bold moves and unwavering confidence. But in that moment, standing in front of a room full of people, his confidence faltered. The laughter wasn't malicious, but it felt like a reminder of all the times in his life when he had pushed others away, when he had been too focused on the future to understand the present. And now, here he was, failing to do something as basic as enjoying a fun moment. The reality of it all started to hit him. It wasn't just the challenge of singing. It was the challenge of being seen as imperfect. It was the fear of exposing himself in a way that his image never allowed. The world saw him as the cool, confident entrepreneur who was always in control, always ahead of the game. But the truth was, even he had his limits. Even he had his flaws. He had been so focused on achieving greatness that he had forgotten how to live in the moment, how to be part of the crowd without needing to be the center of attention. But then, something strange happened. The laughter from the crowd began to die down, replaced by something else. A quieter energy. It was as if the room collectively took a breath, realizing that this was no longer about mocking Elon. It was about watching him grapple with something none of them had expected, vulnerability. And in that, they saw something else, something they hadn't expected to find in a billionaire entrepreneur: humanity. Elon stumbled through the rest of the song, but instead of retreating into himself, he made a choice. He wasn't going to let the moment define him. He wasn't going to let the crowd's expectations take control. He was going to finish this song, flaws and all, because this moment, this tiny, imperfect moment, was his. And, perhaps for the first time in a long time, he could let the world see him not as a genius, not as a mogul, but as simply a man. A man who wasn't perfect, but who was willing to try anyway. Elon Musk had always been the kind of person who thrived under pressure. He was used to the world watching, scrutinizing every move, every tweet, every decision. Whether it was launching SpaceX rockets into orbit or unveiling new Tesla models that challenged entire industries, Elon had grown accustomed to living in the spotlight. Yet, here he was, standing on a stage, microphone in hand, facing a challenge that felt far more daunting than any rocket launch or electric car prototype he'd ever attempted. The laughter that had bubbled up in the crowd earlier now seemed to hang in the air, lingering like a cloud, but it wasn't the mocking kind of laughter that he had feared. It was something else, something that left him feeling exposed but, for the first time, strangely liberated. The audience wasn't laughing at him, they were laughing with him. They were reacting to the rawness of the moment, something they rarely saw from a man who had carefully constructed his public persona to be flawless, unbreakable. The music continued, and with each line of the song, Elon found himself becoming less self-conscious. It was as though he had entered a different reality, one where the world's expectations didn't matter. For once, he wasn't trying to be the best, the smartest, or the most accomplished. He was simply trying to finish the song, to make it to the end. And in that simplicity, he found a strange sense of peace. As he sang, something began to shift in him. It wasn't about the song anymore. It was about the act of letting go, of embracing imperfection. The more he let himself be vulnerable, the more he realized how much of his life had been spent trying to control every outcome, to push every boundary, to make sure that everything was always, unerringly perfect. But now, in front of this room full of people, he could feel the weight of that pressure start to lift. He wasn't perfect, and that was okay. The chorus came around again, and this time, Elon sang louder, with more conviction. The crowd responded with applause, and the room seemed to swell with energy. His voice still wasn't great, certainly not a polished performance worthy of a concert stage, but that wasn't the point. What mattered was that Elon Musk, the man who had sent humans to space, who had revolutionized electric cars, was allowing himself to be flawed, to be human. The crowd's reaction shifted from tentative laughter to something else, genuine admiration. They weren't seeing Elon Musk the billionaire innovator, they were seeing a man in a rare moment of honesty. And in that honesty, there was a power far greater than any technical achievement. Elon wasn't just singing a song, he was letting his guard down, revealing a side of himself that had remained hidden for so long. It was a side that wasn't driven by the relentless pursuit of perfection, but rather one that embraced the beauty of being human. As the song drew to a close, Elon found himself at a crossroads. He had completed the challenge, but the internal journey had only just begun. In those few minutes on stage, something inside him had shifted. He had walked into the spotlight expecting to fail, expecting to be judged. But what he found was an unexpected sense of release, a sense of freedom from the constant pressure to be perfect. And that freedom was both exhilarating and terrifying. For the first time in a long time, Elon felt vulnerable, and yet, for some reason, that vulnerability was more powerful than anything he had ever experienced. In a world that had come to expect so much from him, he had given them something different. Something real. But as the crowd erupted into applause, something else began to bubble up within him, an overwhelming sense of regret. It wasn't regret about the song or the way he had sung it. It was about all the moments he had missed, the relationships he had sacrificed, the times he had pushed away the people closest to him in his obsessive quest for success. In that fleeting moment, as the applause filled the room, he realized how much he had neglected the very thing that had the power to make him truly happy, human connection. The performance was over, but the emotional weight of it was just beginning to settle in. Elon had felt the fleeting power of vulnerability, but now he was forced to reckon with what that meant. Was it too late to change? Was it too late to step away from the relentless pursuit of greatness and start focusing on the things that truly mattered? As he walked off the stage, the applause still echoing in his ears, Elon felt both exhilarated and drained. The man who had revolutionized industries and defied odds had just done something that he never would have imagined himself doing. He had allowed himself to be imperfect. He had stepped outside his comfort zone and embraced vulnerability, but now, the real challenge was figuring out what came next. For the first time in years, Elon Musk had no answers. He had no big ideas to share, no new projects to unveil, and no grand vision to chase. He had only the raw, unsettling feeling that perhaps, just maybe, the future he had spent so much of his life building wasn't the only future worth pursuing. The applause was still ringing in his ears as Elon Musk walked off the stage, but it felt distant, like the echoes of a sound that had no real meaning anymore. As the crowd's clapping gradually faded into murmurs and cheers, Elon's mind was a whirlwind. His thoughts were racing, not about the performance, but about everything else that had just unfolded. The exhilaration of the karaoke moment, the feeling of finally being vulnerable, of sharing a side of himself that the world had never seen, had triggered something far deeper than he had anticipated. He had sung in front of the world, floundered, cracked, and somehow, by sheer willpower, managed to push through. But in that moment, the standing ovation he received felt empty, like a hollow echo. The crowd's approval seemed to slip through his fingers, and the satisfaction of overcoming the challenge turned to something else. Was it really worth it? Was it worth all the years of sacrifice, the missed birthdays, the holidays spent behind a desk or in a lab, the relationships that had faded into distant memories? Elon found a quiet corner of the event space, away from the now bustling crowd, and sat down. He took a long, steadying breath. His heart was still racing, but it wasn't the rush of adrenaline from singing in public, it was the sudden weight of everything else. The real challenge, the one he couldn't escape, was staring him in the face. The truth that had always lurked just beneath the surface. He had spent his life chasing the future, pushing for the impossible, but he had sacrificed so much in the process. And now, sitting there, alone with his thoughts, it all seemed to come crashing down. He pulled out his phone, almost absent-mindedly scrolling through messages, emails, and notifications. There were updates about the latest SpaceX mission, an alert about Tesla's stock price, and a series of press mentions of his karaoke performance. But it all felt so distant. None of it had the same pull, the same excitement it once did. He could almost hear the voice of his mentor, someone he had deeply admired. Success is the ultimate loneliness. You are the master of the universe, but who are you when you close the door? Was that true? Was he so consumed with his legacy and accomplishments that he had forgotten to live for the moments that actually mattered? He had been so obsessed with the big-picture achievements, the world-changing inventions, that he had never stopped to ask himself if he was truly happy in the process. A few moments later, Justine, his ex-wife, appeared in the doorway, her face a blend of concern and curiosity. She had been a part of his life for years, but since their divorce, their relationship had grown more distant. Still, she could read him like no one else. "Are you all right?" she asked softly, walking toward him. Elon ran a hand through his hair, rubbing his forehead as he exhaled. "I don't know. I thought I'd feel different after all of this. But, it's not what I expected." Justine studied him for a moment, then sat down beside him. "You know, it's okay to not have all the answers. It's okay to be imperfect. Maybe that's what you've been missing all these years, real, raw human connection. He turned to look at her, his brow furrowing. I know, but I've always been so focused on moving forward, on accomplishing the next big thing. I thought that's what would bring me happiness. But now I'm not so sure. There's something missing. Something that I didn't even realize until tonight. Justine smiled softly, the kind of smile only someone who had known him for years could give. Maybe you've been chasing the wrong things. Maybe it's not about creating something world-changing, but about being present, being there for the people who matter. You've always been so driven, but at what cost? Her words hit him like a freight train. He had always been the person who pushed boundaries, who demanded the impossible from himself and others. But he had never asked himself what it all truly meant. For years, he had sacrificed relationships, his marriage, his friendships, for the sake of his dreams. And now, in the quiet aftermath of his performance, he realized how much that had cost him. As the conversation continued, Elon felt something shift deep within him. For the first time in what felt like forever, he wasn't thinking about the future, about what he was going to build or conquer next. He wasn't thinking about the endless to-do lists or the relentless pressure to keep moving forward. He was simply present. Justine's words had given him something he hadn't known he needed, a pause. A moment to stop and reflect, to acknowledge the things he had overlooked. The truth was, he had spent so much time chasing the future that he had neglected to live in the present. The people who mattered most, his family, his friends, had been sidelined, and he had been so wrapped up in his own ambitions that he had forgotten how to truly connect with them. The realization was heavy, but it was also liberating. For the first time, Elon was truly considering the value of slowing down, of taking time to reconnect with the people who mattered, and not just with his own lofty goals. The night continued on, but Elon stayed in the corner, talking with Justine and some of his other friends who had gathered around. The light-hearted jokes from earlier had been replaced with more serious, deeper conversations about what really mattered in life. It wasn't that Elon had suddenly abandoned his dreams, but he was starting to understand something new. Success wasn't just about changing the world, it was about sharing it with others. And for the first time in years, he felt like he was ready to embrace that. He didn't need to have all the answers, and he didn't need to constantly be on the move. For once, he was willing to sit with the uncertainty and just be. As the evening wound down, Elon looked around the room at the faces of his friends and family, and something inside him clicked. It wasn't about the applause. It wasn't about the rockets or the cars or the companies. It was about the people. The relationships. The human connection that he had so often pushed aside in favor of bigger, more audacious goals. In the quiet, humbling aftermath of that karaoke challenge, Elon Musk had learned something invaluable. The greatest achievement wasn't about what he could build, but about the people he could share it with. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? As the night came to a close, the once electric atmosphere of the karaoke performance was replaced by the gentle hum of quiet conversations and soft laughter. Elon Musk stood near the edge of the gathering, watching the people around him. His friends, his family, the faces of those who had supported him throughout the years. The applause had long since faded, but the emotional aftershocks were still settling within him, rippling through his consciousness. In the days that followed the event, Elon couldn't shake the feelings that had been stirred in him that night. He had spent so long chasing external achievements, becoming a legend in the tech world, a disruptor in industries that seemed impenetrable. SpaceX and Tesla were symbols of his brilliance, monuments to his visionary thinking. But those accolades, though remarkable, had never provided him with the peace he had just experienced, sitting quietly with Justine and his friends, sharing laughter and vulnerability, unguarded and open. For the first time in a long time, Elon found himself questioning his true purpose. It wasn't the grand visions of conquering Mars or revolutionizing transportation that filled his mind anymore. It was the simple truths about life. About connection, about love, about what really made a person feel whole. He remembered the long nights he had spent working on SpaceX, the time he'd sacrificed from his children, the missed birthdays and holidays. His own work had often consumed him, leaving little room for meaningful personal moments. Even with all of his achievements, he had found himself lonely, emotionally distant from those who mattered most. It wasn't just about how the world viewed him, but how he viewed himself. And in the quiet reflection that followed that fateful night, Elon realized that he had been measuring his worth by his accomplishments, not his relationships. And that needed to change. One evening, as Elon sat on the porch of his house in Los Angeles, looking out over the city skyline, he thought back to the raw vulnerability he had shown on stage. He had felt exposed, almost embarrassed at first, but now he saw that moment as a turning point. The applause, the laughter, the cheers, they had all been fleeting, but the personal shift he had experienced was real and lasting. The next day, Elon decided to take the first step toward rebuilding the relationships he had neglected. He reached out to his children, asking them to spend more time together. He made plans to visit his mother, who he realized he hadn't seen in far too long. For the first time, he made space in his calendar for life, not just for work. He also began to have deeper, more honest conversations with his close friends and business partners. They were no longer just colleagues or collaborators in a shared mission, they were people he genuinely cared about. Instead of just talking about the future of SpaceX or Tesla, he started asking about their lives, their hopes, their challenges, their joys. One of the first changes he made was to his routine. Elon had always been a workaholic, dedicating every waking hour to his companies. But now, he began carving out time for things that once seemed secondary: family dinners, walks with his children, and even picking up hobbies he had once abandoned, like reading or taking short trips without the pressure of deadlines looming over him. It wasn't easy at first. There were moments of guilt, moments where he found himself still fixated on his companies or slipping back into old habits of overwork. But with each passing day, Elon learned to strike a balance between his vision for the future and his need for human connection. One of the most important lessons he learned during this time was that true success wasn't just about the size of the rockets he built or the numbers on Tesla's balance sheet. It was about the impact he had on the people he loved and the lives he touched. Success, in the truest sense of the word, was about nurturing relationships, about being present for the moments that truly mattered. Elon also began to speak more openly about his personal journey. He had spent years being a figure that others looked up to for his unrelenting ambition, but now he shared his struggles, his doubts, and his vulnerabilities with the public. He became a more rounded figure, one who wasn't afraid to show that even the most successful people had challenges to face. At one of his next public events, Elon spoke candidly about the experience that had changed him. He shared his feelings about that karaoke night, admitting that he had never imagined that singing a song in front of an audience would lead him to such profound self-reflection. "It's easy to get lost in the chase," he said, standing before a packed room of investors and innovators. "To think that the next achievement, the next milestone will finally bring peace. But the truth is, peace comes from the people we share our lives with, not from the things we build. We can change the world, but we mustn't forget to live in it." The crowd, expecting another keynote full of grand technological predictions, sat in stunned silence. This wasn't the Elon Musk they had come to know, the relentless, visionary leader. This was a man who had learned something more valuable than any accolade: the value of connection, the power of being present. It was in that moment, standing in front of that audience, that Elon realized he didn't have to be perfect. He didn't have to be invincible. He didn't have to keep pushing himself and everyone around him to the breaking point in order to be worthy of respect. He had already proven himself in countless ways, but now, he could prove that being human, flawed, imperfect, and vulnerable, was just as important as any success. The most profound thing Elon Musk learned from that night was that greatness could be found in the simple, the quiet, and the deeply personal moments of life. He began to realize that the most important legacy he could leave wasn't just about rockets or electric cars, but about the relationships he had nurtured and the love he had given and received. The weeks that followed the event were filled with a mixture of reflection, adjustment, and personal growth. Elon Musk had always prided himself on his ability to innovate, to push the boundaries of what was possible. But now, he was finding new meaning in areas of his life that had once seemed secondary, or even expendable. No longer was the future defined solely by the trajectory of SpaceX or Tesla. For the first time, he saw the world around him with fresh eyes. It wasn't an immediate transformation. Old habits died hard. There were still moments when the weight of his companies, his obligations, and his vision for the future pressed down on him, reminding him of the relentless drive that had gotten him to where he was. But the difference was in how he responded. Instead of burying himself in work, instead of shutting out the world to chase the next breakthrough, he began to make space for something else, something equally important, if not more so, the present. In a way, the karaoke night had been the catalyst. He had always been so focused on the endgame, on achieving something monumental, that he had never stopped to ask if it was worth it. It had taken a simple, spontaneous moment, singing off-key in front of thousands, to unlock a deeper understanding of himself. He began spending more time with his children, both his sons and his daughter. No longer did he see them as obstacles to his work or as distractions. They were his connection to the world outside of tech, his grounding force. Whether it was taking them to the park, playing video games together, or simply listening to their stories at the dinner table, Elon found joy in these moments. He realized that being a present father was as important as being a visionary entrepreneur. But the most profound change came in his relationship with those closest to him. His friendship with Justine, though marked by years of separation, was evolving into something deeper and more supportive. They began to rebuild their connection, not as husband and wife, but as two people who shared a history, a bond that transcended the mistakes and heartbreaks of the past. They had both grown, and in a way, they had rediscovered each other, not in the traditional sense, but in a way that allowed them to be there for their children and each other, without the weight of old wounds. During one of their conversations, Justine remarked, "You know, Elon, for so long, I think you were afraid of being vulnerable. You put up walls because you thought they made you stronger. But now, you're different. You've finally realized that it's okay to let people in. You don't have to do it all alone." Her words hit him harder than he expected. It wasn't just a shift in how he saw himself, but how he began to relate to the world around him. He had always been a visionary, a man who looked to the stars. But now, for the first time, he was learning to keep his feet firmly planted on earth, to appreciate the small moments that made life worth living. One evening, as Elon sat on the balcony of his home overlooking the sprawling city below, he thought about all the years he had spent working tirelessly to build his empire. He had poured so much of himself into his companies that he had forgotten how to live. The memories of his childhood, his family, his past relationships, had been buried beneath the weight of his ambitions. But now, as he gazed out at the horizon, there was a new sense of clarity. He wasn't just looking at the future in terms of his companies or his next big idea. He was seeing it in terms of his life as a whole, a life that included people, relationships, and emotions. For the first time, Elon felt like he had a better balance between the personal and professional. His phone buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was a message from his close friend and confidant, Larry Page. "Hey, we should meet up. I know you've been busy with everything, but I've been thinking about some of the things you've said recently. You've been onto something, let's talk." Elon smiled at the message. Larry had always been one of the few people who understood his mindset, who could challenge him without judgment. They had shared countless late-night conversations about the future, about technology, and about life. But now, the conversation would be different. It wasn't just about the next frontier in space or electric vehicles. This time, it was about the journey, about the process. The following week, Elon met with Larry at a quiet cafe in Palo Alto. They sat outside, the sun casting a warm glow on the table as they exchanged stories. But instead of jumping immediately into a discussion about technology or business, Elon found himself talking about the shifts he had experienced recently, about his children, his relationship with Justine, and the way he was now seeing the world. Larry listened intently, nodding along, before speaking. You know, Elon, I think this shift in perspective is something we all need to pay attention to. You've always been the one pushing the limits, but now you're seeing that it's not just about what we can build, it's about the lives we touch along the way. That's a powerful realization. Elon sat back, his fingers tracing the rim of his coffee cup. I always thought the answers were out there, in the next invention, the next idea. But now I realize the answers are in here, he said, tapping his chest. They've always been here. As they continued their conversation, Elon reflected on how far he had come, and how much further he had to go. He still had big dreams, of course. He still wanted to send people to Mars, revolutionize energy consumption, and build technologies that could change the world. But now, those dreams were tempered with a greater understanding of what mattered most. He wasn't abandoning his mission. He was simply seeing it through a new lens, one that incorporated not just the ambition to change the world, but the desire to live a life that mattered. For the first time in a long while, Elon felt hopeful, not because of his projects or his businesses, but because he had rediscovered the power of human connection. In that moment, he knew something important: true fulfillment wasn't just about what he could do for the world. It was about the people he shared it with, and the life he built with them. And that, perhaps, was the greatest discovery of all. Elon Musk had always been a man of action, one who thrived on challenges. Yet, as he moved through his daily routines in the weeks following his emotional transformation, he realized that the hardest challenge of all lay not in rockets or electric cars, but in himself. The path he had embarked upon was an internal journey, one that required him to rethink nearly every aspect of his life, from his relationships to his approach to work. And as every challenge had always been, this one would require everything he had: patience, persistence, and a willingness to evolve. The shift in perspective was not an easy one to maintain. Though Elon had become more present in his personal life, it was still hard to let go of the old habits, the ones that had defined him for so long. There were moments when the urge to dive back into his work, to immerse himself in the future of Tesla or SpaceX, tugged at him. His mind, always racing ahead to the next great idea, sometimes struggled to stay in the moment. Yet, with each passing day, he grew more committed to the new rhythm he had found, one that balanced personal connection with professional ambition. One evening, after a long day of meetings at Tesla, Elon returned home to find his children waiting for him. They had been playing in the backyard, their laughter echoing across the yard, a sound that always brought him a sense of warmth and grounding. He walked over to them, his mind still swirling with the day's business, but he made an effort to put it aside. Instead of rushing inside to check emails or make calls, he knelt down and joined them in their play. "Hey, what are we building today?" he asked, his voice light and playful. One of his sons, X, looked up at him with a grin. "A spaceship. We're going to Mars." Elon laughed, a deep, genuine sound. "A Mars mission, huh? I think I can help with that." As he lay on the grass, helping them build their imaginary spaceship, Elon couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed in such a short time. Here he was, no longer the hyper-focused businessman who put work above all else. He was a father, fully present, fully engaged in a moment that was as important as any board meeting. This, he realized, was the true measure of success. But even as he savored these moments, Elon knew that the transition wouldn't be simple or easy. His mind still held the same drive that had propelled him through some of the most difficult ventures in modern history. There were days when he felt like he was walking a fine line between maintaining his visionary approach to innovation and honoring the more grounded, human side of his life. The question constantly nagged at him: can I be both, a father and an entrepreneur who changes the world? The answer, he soon realized, wasn't to choose between one or the other. It was about integration, finding ways to marry his passions with his personal life. There would be times when his work would demand his full attention, but there would also be times when his family would require the same. It was a balance, and one that would require constant adjustment. One particular afternoon, Elon took a phone call from a longtime colleague and friend, Gwynne Shotwell, who had been with him at SpaceX almost from the beginning. Their conversation started as usual, discussing rocket launches and the latest developments in the aerospace industry. But as the call went on, Elon found himself thinking more about how this conversation would have played out a few months ago, when work was all-consuming and the personal side of life was an afterthought. "Elon," Gwynne said, her voice laced with concern, "I know how much you care about SpaceX and Tesla. But you also need to think about the long game. You've got to take care of yourself and the people you care about. I don't know if I've ever seen you truly live outside of work. You've got to find balance, Elon." The words hit him harder than he expected. It wasn't the first time Gwynne had spoken with him about balance, but something in the way she said it now resonated more deeply. She was right. He had spent so many years building companies, leading revolutions, that he had neglected to nurture the very thing that kept him grounded, his relationships. "Thanks, Gwynne," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "I've been trying to figure that out. I think I'm finally starting to get it." After the call, Elon stood on the balcony of his home, staring out at the night sky. For the first time, he didn't see a world of endless possibility and progress. Instead, he saw a world full of connection, both with the people he loved and with the parts of himself he had long ignored. It was a humbling realization. His new journey, he understood now, wasn't about one grand shift. It was about small, consistent changes, moments of clarity, and most importantly, a commitment to finding a life that was worth living, not just one that was worth achieving. The next day, Elon took a break from his usual whirlwind of meetings. Instead of jumping straight into work, he visited SpaceX's headquarters and spent time walking the floor, talking with engineers and designers, but this time, the conversation was different. Instead of diving straight into technical discussions, he found himself asking questions about their lives, their families, and their own personal goals. He was surprised at how much he enjoyed these conversations, how they allowed him to see the people behind the projects in a new light. Back at home, his children continued to pull him into their world of imagination. He had promised them a trip to the beach, something they'd been asking for weeks. Elon had always been a man of extremes, either fully immersed in work or fully invested in his ambitions. But now, he found joy in the simple act of stepping away from the hustle and bustle of his world to be present with his kids, digging in the sand and watching the sunset. It wasn't about grand gestures or moments of brilliance. It was about the moments that made life feel real. At the end of the day, as he lay on the couch next to his children, Elon felt a deep sense of contentment, something he had rarely experienced before. It wasn't the same rush of excitement he felt when he launched a rocket or achieved a major breakthrough. This was different. This was a quiet peace, a feeling of being exactly where he was supposed to be. Elon Musk had always been known for his relentless pursuit of innovation, for being a visionary who saw the future before anyone else. But as the weeks turned into months, he began to realize that his leadership was changing, not just in how he managed his companies, but in how he led the people around him. The shift in his perspective on life was now influencing his role as a leader, and he could feel it in the way his employees, his partners, and even his competitors began to respond to him. Gone were the days of high-pressure, zero-tolerance for failure environments. Elon had once believed that the only way to drive progress was through sheer willpower, by pushing himself and those around him to their limits. But now, he saw the value in empowering his teams, in providing them with the support and encouragement they needed to excel, not just in their work, but in their personal lives as well. It was a Friday afternoon when the first real test of this new leadership approach came. Elon had arranged a meeting with key members of both SpaceX and Tesla, an all-hands-on-deck strategy session to discuss upcoming goals and challenges. As the team gathered in the conference room, Elon could feel the palpable tension that always seemed to accompany these types of meetings. There was the usual eagerness, yes, but also the weight of high expectations and the fear of failure. The meeting began with the usual updates, launch schedules, production timelines, new developments. But midway through, Elon took a moment to pause and do something he had never done in previous meetings. he asked a question that had nothing to do with work. "How are you all doing?" Elon asked, looking around the room at his team. "I mean, really. How's everything going in your personal lives? Are you getting time for yourselves, for your families?" The room fell silent, a moment of shock and hesitation hanging in the air. This was Elon Musk, the man who had been synonymous with the drive for progress, the one who expected only the best from his teams, no matter the cost. His question was unexpected, and at first, it seemed out of place. One of the senior engineers, Kelly, was the first to respond, looking somewhat surprised but grateful. "Well, I guess I've been so focused on meeting deadlines that I haven't really thought about it. But I have a family, and sometimes I feel like I don't get enough time to spend with them." Elon nodded, understanding. It's easy to get caught up in work and forget what really matters. We're all here because we want to change the world. But we also need to take care of ourselves and each other. If we're burnt out, we can't do our best work. The tone in the room shifted. What started as a tense, high-stakes meeting now felt like a conversation about the balance between ambition and well-being. As the meeting continued, Elon encouraged his team to think about how they could support each other in both their personal and professional lives, creating a work environment that was driven by passion, but also by empathy and understanding. It was a pivotal moment. And as the meeting concluded, the team seemed energized in a new way, not because they had made grand plans for the future, but because they had been given permission to be human. They understood that Elon wasn't just their boss. He was someone who genuinely cared about their well-being, who saw them not just as employees, but as individuals with lives outside of work. That evening, after the meeting, Elon called a few of his closest colleagues to check in. He reached out to Gwynne Shotwell again, as well as to Jared Burkle, his trusted advisor. "You know," he said to Gwynne, "I think I've been doing this leadership thing all wrong. I've been so focused on results and performance that I've forgotten what really makes a team strong: human connection." Gwynne's voice was warm on the other end of the line. "Elon, I'm glad you're seeing that. The most successful leaders are the ones who know how to inspire, not just push. People want to know that their leaders care about them, that they see them as more than just cogs in a machine. That's how you build loyalty, how you get the best out of people." Elon leaned back in his chair, contemplating her words. He had always prided himself on being tough, on being the one who set high standards. But now, he realized, those standards needed to be balanced with something else: compassion, patience, and a deep respect for the people who made his vision a reality. The next morning, Elon woke up early, as he always did, but this time he felt something different. There was a renewed sense of purpose in him, not just in the work he was doing, but in the way he was leading. He had always believed that the future would be defined by the innovations he created. But now, he understood that the future would also be shaped by the relationships he built along the way. It wasn't just about the technology, it was about the people who would carry that technology forward. The engineers at SpaceX, the designers at Tesla, the teams working tirelessly to make his vision a reality, they were the true drivers of progress. And Elon was finally starting to see that. As he sat at his desk, preparing for the day's meetings, he made a promise to himself, to continue leading with the same passion he always had, but with a new perspective. He would push forward, not just through his own actions, but by empowering those around him, by listening to them, and by helping them succeed, both in their work and in their lives. Later that week, Elon decided to take a rare weekend off. He took his children to a quiet cabin in the mountains, away from the constant buzz of technology and the ever-present demands of his companies. It was a simple weekend, a weekend spent hiking, playing games, and just being present. It was everything he had been missing. On their last night in the cabin, as the stars twinkled above them and the air was crisp and fresh, Elon sat with his children around a campfire, roasting marshmallows. He realized, in that moment, that this was the future he had been striving for all along: not just the rockets, not just the electric cars, but the ability to be present with the people who mattered most. He wasn't just building a future for humanity. He was building a future for his family, for himself, and for the people he cared about. And that, he realized, was a future worth fighting for. The moment of clarity that Elon Musk had been waiting for came not in a boardroom, nor in the launch of a new rocket or electric car. It came in the quietest of settings, in the midst of a rare day off, spent with his children in a small, peaceful cabin in the mountains. Away from the whirlwind of business, the pressures of global ambitions, and the ever-present need for progress, Elon was forced to confront something he had long avoided, his own sense of self and his place in the world. For years, he had been defined by his work. Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink, these companies were not just projects, they were his life's work, his reason for being. But now, as he sat on the porch, looking out over a vast expanse of trees and mountains, he began to see that perhaps his identity had been too tied to his ambitions. Maybe he had been so focused on shaping the future of humanity that he had overlooked the importance of shaping his own future, one that included time for himself, for growth, and for connection. That afternoon, after a long hike with his children, Elon sat on a rock by the stream, watching the water flow gently over the rocks. It was as though the calmness of the landscape mirrored the quiet realization unfolding inside of him. This was the moment he had been waiting for, even if he didn't fully know it. In the midst of the beauty of nature, he felt a profound sense of gratitude for the life he had built. But he also realized that he had been chasing something external for so long that he had neglected what truly mattered. I've spent my life trying to build something greater than myself, he thought, watching a leaf float downstream. But maybe, just maybe, I need to start building something more in tune with myself. As he sat there, the cool breeze brushing against his face, Elon understood something deeper about leadership and life. It wasn't enough to lead companies to new frontiers, or to inspire millions with promises of electric cars and human exploration of space. He now saw that to truly lead, to create a legacy that would last, he needed to take care of the people in his life, himself included. It wasn't just about what he could give to the world. It was about what he could give to the people around him. And that included his family, his friends, his colleagues, and, perhaps most importantly, himself. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Elon sat with his children around a campfire. The stars twinkled brightly above, the fire crackling as they roasted marshmallows. For the first time in a long while, Elon allowed himself to simply be. He wasn't thinking about rockets or electric cars or the future of AI. He was focused on the moment, the warmth of the fire, the laughter of his children, the quiet hum of nature around him. In that peaceful silence, Elon realized that the future wasn't just about what he could achieve. It was about the people he would leave behind, the way he would inspire others to live fully, to find joy in the simple moments, and to remember that progress and success weren't measured solely by achievements, but by the quality of the lives we lead. A few days later, back at work, Elon found himself reflecting on this newfound clarity. He'd spent his entire career pushing boundaries, constantly striving for more. But now, the idea of pushing forward without considering the well-being of the people around him seemed absurd. He had always believed that in order to build the future, he had to be relentless, driven by the pursuit of innovation and efficiency. But now, he understood that true leadership didn't come from being the hardest worker in the room. It came from inspiring others to reach their fullest potential while also nurturing their humanity. It was a simple question, but it signaled a shift in Elon's leadership style, one that focused not just on performance but on the holistic well-being of the people who worked alongside him. And this time, instead of being met with nervousness or hesitation, the room responded differently. People began to open up. They shared stories of their own challenges in balancing work and life. Some spoke about the pressure they felt to perform at the highest level, while others discussed the importance of finding personal time. Elon listened intently, offering support and advice, but most importantly, he encouraged them to find ways to take care of themselves, to prioritize their own lives just as much as they prioritized their work. It was a stark contrast to the earlier days when meetings were all about deadlines, goals, and results. Now, there was space for vulnerability, for reflection, and for understanding. As the meeting concluded, Gwyn Shotwell approached him, her expression thoughtful. "Elon," she said, "I can't tell you how much I've seen you change. This is what real leadership is about. It's about empowering others, showing them that they matter, not just for what they do, but for who they are." Elon smiled, his mind already racing with thoughts of the next challenge. But this time, he wasn't thinking about launching the next big project. He was thinking about something more foundational, building a team and a company that could thrive not just because of their technical prowess, but because of the care and compassion they extended to one another. The days following his moment of clarity in the mountains passed quickly, but for Elon Musk, they marked the beginning of something profound. He was no longer the man defined solely by his ventures or his ambitions. He had found a new perspective, one where the human element of leadership and the importance of personal well-being became just as central as technological innovation. And as he prepared for a pivotal conference, a gathering of minds from across the globe, focusing on the future of space exploration, AI, and renewable energy, he knew this would be the moment to put his new approach to the test. The conference was scheduled to be the most significant event of the year in the tech and innovation world. Leaders from NASA, major universities, cutting-edge startups, and even representatives from foreign governments were attending. The usual topics were on the agenda: space colonization, the ethics of artificial intelligence, and the future of sustainable energy. But Elon had something different in mind for his keynote speech, something that would take the audience by surprise. Instead of diving directly into his usual technical expertise, he planned to deliver a message that reflected his journey, his evolution, not just as a CEO, but as a person who had learned that leadership was as much about heart as it was about vision. On the day of the conference, Elon stood backstage, waiting for his turn. He had always been accustomed to the bright lights, the audience's eager faces, the cameras flashing in anticipation of his next big revelation. But today, there was a nervousness he had never felt before. It wasn't the usual fear of failure that plagued him before a big presentation. No, this was different. It was the fear of being vulnerable, of sharing a side of himself that had long been hidden behind the persona of a tech mogul. As the introduction ended, Elon stepped onto the stage, the soft hum of the audience's chatter gradually fading. His eyes swept across the room, taking in the sea of faces, scientists, engineers, entrepreneurs, dreamers, all eager to hear what he would say. He took a deep breath and began, not with a statement of progress or a declaration of future plans, but with a question. "How many of you, like me, have ever felt the pressure to be perfect?" he asked, his voice steady but earnest. "To always be ahead, to always have the answer, to always be on top of your game. I know I've spent much of my life chasing perfection, pushing myself and others to the edge, convinced that the only way to make a real impact was through relentless effort, no matter the cost." He paused for a moment, letting his words sink in. The crowd was silent, listening intently. It wasn't often that a figure like Elon Musk, the man behind SpaceX and Tesla, admitted to such vulnerabilities. "I've come to realize, however," he continued, "that success isn't just about being the best. It's about being human. It's about embracing the failures and the setbacks, about understanding that we're not defined by how many rockets we launch or how many cars we produce. We're defined by how we treat each other, by the love we show, the lives we touch, and the empathy we extend to those around us." The room was still. Elon could feel the weight of his own words pressing in on him, but this time, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like freedom. He went on to talk about his journey, how he had spent years at the top of his game, always looking ahead, always pushing forward. But it wasn't until recently, after moments of reflection and personal growth, that he truly understood what it meant to lead with compassion. To be a leader who didn't just demand results but also nurtured the people behind those results. He shared how his relationships, both personal and professional, had begun to take center stage in his life, how he now viewed success not just in terms of innovation but in terms of creating a legacy of balance, care, and human connection. "As we look to the future," he said, his tone taking on a more hopeful note, "let's remember that technology is only as powerful as the people who create it. And the future of humanity will not just be shaped by the gadgets we invent or the machines we build. It will be shaped by how we treat each other, by how we work together, by how we support one another's growth. That's the true power of progress. As he finished his speech, the room remained quiet for a moment, and then a slow applause began, building into a full-throated ovation. The crowd was not just clapping for the achievements Elon had made in his career, but for the man he had become. The leader who, after all the triumphs and failures, had found a deeper understanding of what it meant to lead, not just with the mind, but with the heart. The conference came to a close, and as Elon made his way back to his hotel, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. He had shared his truth with the world, vulnerable yet powerful, and the response had been overwhelming. For the first time, he felt as though he had let go of the weight of being just the innovator, and had stepped into the shoes of something more, an individual, a father, a mentor, a leader who was just as human as anyone else. Later that evening, as he sat in his hotel room, he thought about the many challenges that lay ahead: missions to Mars, breakthroughs in artificial intelligence, the fight for a sustainable future. There was still so much to do. But now, with his new approach to leadership and life, Elon felt ready for whatever came next. He was no longer just chasing progress for the sake of it. He was now focused on creating a legacy that would live on not just through his companies, but through the people whose lives he had touched. As he looked out the window, the city lights twinkling below, he felt a sense of gratitude wash over him. The future was no longer a distant, abstract concept to be conquered, it was a journey to be shared. And for the first time, he truly understood what that meant. Years later, when Elon Musk's name would be spoken in the same breath as other great pioneers of history, it would not just be for his accomplishments in space or electric cars. It would be for the way he transformed leadership, for the way he redefined success, for the way he made the world believe that progress could be both extraordinary and humane. His legacy would not only be marked by the technological marvels he helped create, but by the people who followed in his footsteps, leaders who understood that true greatness came not from what you achieved, but from how you made others feel, how you inspired them to be better, not just at their jobs, but as individuals. And so, as the stars of Mars flickered on the horizon, Elon Musk's greatest contribution to humanity was clear: it was not just the technology he pioneered, but the human spirit he nurtured along the way. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?